Over the past few months, several Christians have made claims in our channel's comment section about the Shroud of Turin. According to some Christian groups, the shroud is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ, a 4.4-meter linen cloth currently kept in Turin, Italy, and they claim it somehow proves that Christianity is true. Let us look at two of those comments. This Christian writes, "Hello Satan, the Bible is the most printed book in history, exactly what we would expect of a book of God. I'm not going to debate with Satan and his arrogance. Go investigate the Shroud of Turin. You did your best to discredit it, didn't you? But you have failed. Now get behind me." And here is a comment from another Christian. He is also referring to the Shroud of Turin. In the last line he says, "And finally we have found the Shroud of Turin, showing us the image of our risen Savior." The first Christian commenter calls me Satan and tells me to go investigate the Shroud of Turin, as if the shroud is the one piece of evidence that would silence all criticism of Christianity. The second Christian commenter lists the shroud alongside Bible prophecy as confirmation of, in his words, the image of our risen Savior, Jesus. Now, before I go any further, I want to say something important. Not all Christians believe the shroud is genuine, so I am not making a claim about what all Christians believe. I am specifically responding to those who present the shroud as evidence, scientific or historical, for their faith. Now, separately, over the past few weeks, several non-Christians and ex-Christians have also been writing to us, but for a completely different reason. A study published in early 2026 analyzed DNA found on the shroud and reported that nearly 40% of the human DNA on the cloth traces back to Indian genetic lineages, suggesting the fabric may have originated in or passed through India. This has generated a lot of questions and some alarm. You can also see their comments on the screen. Some viewers want to understand what the study actually found. Others are worried that missionaries will weaponize this finding to claim that Jesus had Indian DNA, that Christianity has Indian roots, and use it as a new tool for evangelism in India. So in this video, we are going to address both groups. We are going to examine what the Shroud of Turin actually is, what the historical and scientific evidence says about it, and what the Indian DNA study actually claims versus how it is being misrepresented. Now, I already mentioned that not all Christians believe the shroud is genuine. But here is something worth noting. Even Christians who privately doubt its authenticity will rarely speak when other Christians use it as an evangelism tool. They will let it pass. They will allow it to be used to impress non-Christians, to intimidate ex-Christians, and now potentially to claim an Indian connection to Jesus in order to make Christianity appear less foreign to Indian audiences. So regardless of what any individual Christian believes privately, the shroud is actively being used as an apologetic weapon, and that is reason enough to examine it honestly and expose what the evidence actually shows. Let us start from the beginning. What exactly is the Shroud of Turin? It is a linen cloth approximately 4.4 meters long and 1.1 meters wide, currently kept in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. On this cloth, there is a faint image of a man, visible from both the front and the back, who appears to have wounds consistent with crucifixion. There are marks that look like bloodstains at the wrists, feet, and side. There are markings that some interpret as wounds from a crown of thorns. Christians who believe in its authenticity claim this is the burial cloth in which Jesus of Nazareth was wrapped after his crucifixion. Some go further and claim that the image itself was formed at the moment of his resurrection, a kind of supernatural imprint left when he was risen from dead. It is one of the most studied objects in human history. Now it's time to go through the actual evidence, historical, scientific, and genetic, carefully and honestly. And when we do that, a very clear picture emerges. Number 1, the historical problem. Let us start with history, because this is where the first major problem appears, and it is a problem that no amount of DNA analysis or image studies can solve. If the Shroud of Turin is genuinely the burial cloth of Jesus, it should have a continuous historical record going back approximately 2000 years to 1st century Jerusalem. Think about it. This would be the most sacred physical object in all of Christianity. the cloth that touched the body of the Son of God. You would expect it to be carefully preserved, venerated, documented, and passed down through church records with the utmost care. But the Shroud of Turin has no record up to the 14th century. The very first documented historical appearance of the shroud is in 1354 AD in the small French town of Lire, 1354 years after the supposed birth of Jesus Christ. A French knight named Geoffrey de Charny presented it to a local church. That is where the historical trail begins. Not in Jerusalem, not in Rome, in medieval France in the 14th century. So for 1320 years, the shroud was completely unmentioned in any historical record, no church document, no pilgrimage account, no bishop's letter, no inventory of any kind, nothing. And it gets worse. Shortly after the shroud appeared in Lire, a local bishop named Henry de Poitiers investigated it. He concluded it was a forgery. He even claimed to have identified the artist who made it. His successor, Bishop Pierre d'Arcis, wrote a formal memorandum to Pope Clement VII in 1389 stating directly that the image had been cunningly painted, that the previous bishop had discovered the fraud, and that the forger had actually confessed. That is not a promising foundation for one of Christianity's most dramatic apologetic claims. Now let us move to the scientific evidence, specifically radiocarbon dating. And this is where the case against the shroud's authenticity becomes very difficult to dismiss. In 1988, after years of negotiation, the Vatican agreed to allow a small sample of the shroud to be tested. 3 completely independent laboratories were selected: the University of Oxford in England, the University of Arizona in the United States, and the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. The entire process was coordinated and supervised by the British Museum. Each laboratory received a small sample from the shroud along with control sample of known age, so they could independently verify the accuracy of their methods. All 3 laboratories, working completely independently of each other, reached the same conclusion. The linen of the Shroud of Turin dated to between 1216 to 1390 AD, between 13th to 14th century. This result was published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature in 1989, signed by 21 scientists. The conclusion was stated plainly. The results provide conclusive evidence that the linen of the Shroud of Turin is medieval. Notice what this means. 3 independent labs, 3 separate tests, 1 consistent result. And that result is the Shroud of Turin belongs to 13th to 14th century after Jesus, and that perfectly matches the historical record we just discussed. The shroud appears in France in 1354. The carbon dating places the origin of cloth in roughly that same period. History and science are telling exactly the same story. While some have questioned the sampling method, no new large-scale independently verified radiocarbon testing has overturned the 1988 result. So we have the historical record and the carbon dating, 2 independent lines of evidence, both pointing to the same conclusion. This is a medieval cloth. Now the image problem. Now let us look at the image itself, because this is where Christian apologists make some of their most dramatic claims and where the argument can sound most compelling to an uninformed audience. The image on the shroud is unusual. It is extremely faint. It does not appear to have been painted with brush strokes in any conventional sense. And most strikingly, it behaves like a photographic negative. This property was only discovered in 1898 when an Italian photographer named Secondo Pia photographed the shroud for the first time and noticed that his negative plate revealed a strikingly detailed positive image. Christian apologists seized on this immediately. Their argument is simple. A medieval forger could not have known to create a negative image because photography was not invented until the 19th century. Therefore, they say, the image could not have been made by human hands. It must have a supernatural origin. It is a striking argument, but it does not hold up. Because a negative image is not a photographic concept. It is simply a reversal of light and dark tones. Any 3-dimensional object naturally produces this kind of tonal variation depending on how light falls across its surface. And recent experimental work has shown that similar negative-like images can be produced by draping cloth over a three-dimensional form. A skilled 14th century craftsman working from a carved figure could have produced this result without any miraculous intervention whatsoever. They just required skill and craft, both of which medieval Europe possessed in abundance. So this claim doesn't hold up. Now let us address the claim that has been flooding our comments this past week, the Indian DNA story. In March 2026, a team of researchers led by Professor Gianni Barcaccia at the University of Padova in Italy published a study analyzing dust particles that were vacuumed from the shroud back in 1978. Using advanced genetic sequencing techniques, they identified DNA from a wide range of sources on the cloth. The headline finding that spread across the internet was this: approximately 38.7% of the human DNA found on the shroud traces back to Indian genetic lineages. And immediately, some people began claiming Jesus had Indian DNA. The shroud proves a connection between Jesus and India. Christianity has Indian roots. Before we go any further, I need to point out something important that most of the news coverage buried or ignored entirely. This study is a preprint, meaning it has not yet been peer-reviewed. It has not been independently verified. It has not gone through the standard scientific process of scrutiny and validation. It is a preliminary finding, not an established conclusion. That alone should make us cautious before drawing any dramatic claims from it. But let us set that aside and look at what the study actually says. Because even taking it at face value, it does not say what apologists, the Christian missionaries, are claiming it says. The researchers themselves offer a straightforward explanation for the Indian DNA. India was a major textile production center in the ancient world. There is well-documented trade between India and the Mediterranean going back thousands of years. Rabbinic texts, the Jewish rabbinic texts, even mention linen imported from the region near the Indus Valley. The researchers' own conclusion is simply this: the yarn used to make the cloth may have originated in India and been traded westward through established commercial routes. That is it. The study is talking about the origin of the fabric, not the origin of any person. It does not say Jesus had Indian DNA. It does not say Jesus visited India. It does not say the blood on the shroud is Indian. Those claims are not in the study. They are being invented by people who either have not read it or are deliberately misrepresenting it. So when the Christian missionaries tell you that the shroud has Indian DNA and therefore Jesus had Indian DNA, they are not reading the study. They are misrepresenting it. They are taking a finding about ancient textile trade routes and turning it into a claim about the genetics of a 1st century Jewish man. The two things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And remember, we have already established that the cloth itself dates to the medieval period, 13th to 14th century after Jesus Christ. Even if the DNA evidence were clean and uncontaminated, which it is not, you would still be analyzing the DNA on a 4th century cloth, not a 1st century burial shroud. So let us bring everything together. We have examined the Shroud of Turin from 4 completely independent angles: history, carbon dating, image formation, and DNA analysis. And every single one of them points in the same direction. Historically, the shroud has no documented existence before 14th century. It appeared suddenly in medieval France, was immediately investigated by the local bishop, and was declared a forgery, with the forger reportedly identified and confessed. Scientifically, 3 independent laboratories tested the cloth and dated it to between 1260 and 1390 AD. The image formation is consistent with what a skilled medieval craftsman could have produced using a sculpted figure. And the Indian DNA claim, rather than proving any connection between Jesus and India, simply reflects the fact that the cloth may have been woven from Indian linen, which was a common trade commodity in the ancient and medieval world. So this Shroud of Turin proves nothing about Jesus. None of this settles questions about the resurrection one way or the other. What it does establish clearly is that the Shroud of Turin is not reliable evidence for any theological claim. It is a medieval artifact. Using it as proof of the resurrection or as proof of Indian connection to Jesus is not faith, it is misinformation.